It's Tuesday night, and welcome back to Draft Savages, the NFL Draft Podcast for FootballSavages.com. I'm your host, Seth Cox. With me tonight, my co-host, Justin Higdon. How are you doing, Justin?
I'm still trying to decipher this Nick Foles for Sam Bradford trade. I don't think there's enough alcohol for me to understand it.
And the man whose team does nothing in free agency and wins every year, Justice Mosqueda. Justice, what's up?
We lost Revis, man. Burn the damn town down. It's done. It could have been our year, man. We could have made a run, but confidence stays sitting in his hands while the phone rings.
And of course, a fan of the team that made the biggest splash in free agency, Ian Wharton. Ian is joining us tonight to talk about the defensive back class in the 2015 NFL Draft. But he'll join us, and he can give us a little bit of an insight to the Miami Dolphins spending $114 million on Ndamukong Suh.
That's the rumored number, and apparently he might get $60 million escrow check right away. So we'll see how that works out.
He's just going to end up owning the Dolphins. So I think that's how it's going to work out. Well, we're here to talk about the 2015 NFL Draft, the defensive back class, and the first thing that we're going to talk about is going to be about the cornerback one. A lot of people have some different opinions on this, and I wanted to gauge the panel here of what they think of this class. And we'll start with Ian because he's our guest tonight. Trey Waynes and Marcus Peters. They're kind of cornerback one, cornerback two. Are those your top two to start with? And if so, how do you rank them?
For me, Marcus Peters is easily the number one cornerback in this class. I've got him as my number two overall prospect, actually, across all prospects. For him, just the reports of at the combine kind of cleared off the character concerns. I'm not a big character guy in terms of grading. I don't know these guys. I have no access to the coaches and such, but I think that was some positive momentum for him in the right direction, because what teams need to focus on is on the field. And I did a project last summer where I went back and looked at Darrell Revis, looked at Richard Sherman, looked at all the top cornerbacks from the past 7 or 8 years, and just try to compare, because I was writing scouting reports for Bleacher Report on defensive backs last year. So I was like, okay, I really wanted to know what are the best guys looking like. And I came away, I charted every snap of Marcus Peters this season, and just the results were phenomenal. Like, this guy, doesn't matter on the scheme, doesn't matter who he faces. Jalen Strong, could be any of the Pac-12 receivers. There's a lot of talented Pac-12 receivers, but especially Jalen Strong. That's one I really took the most from, because he's bigger, technically he's faster, if you believe his 40 time. And I just think Peters is transcendent this game. You look at his physicality, his ball skills, his awareness, his footwork is phenomenal. I mean, this is a very, very technically sound player already entering the NFL. So if his character checks out for me, he is easily the top cornerback. And then if you look at Trey Waynes I have right there with Johnson. First name is escaping me off the top of my head, even though I just did an article on him. Kevin Johnson, Wake Forest. I have those two neck and neck. I thought that Waynes, he's more scheme dependent than Johnson in my opinion, but they are right there, number two, number three, both fringe first-round picks for me right now.
All right, can you hear me now? I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, we can.
Justice, for you in this class, I know you came in with Efo as your top safety because you're an Oregon Duck homer, but put your biases aside for a moment. And what do you think of this cornerback class, and how do you rank that top two?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the Pierce train. He was, I was talking to who was it, Dave Brugler, last year when I was like trying to pump him out, and he was like, "Man, I think Peters is probably the top corner in this class." And I was like, "Yeah, I've ride with that like for like the past 3 months." I think Waynes is clearly the next guy up. After that, it kind of gets a little shady. I mean, there's like Jalen Collins and stuff. And Jalen Collins is, perfectly fine in of himself. He's still a young player. He tested well at the combine. I like guys like Kevin Johnson. I like guys who are on the longer side just naturally. Kind of bummed how Quinn Mullins performed at the combine, to be totally honest. He was the one guy who did really poorly that I thought was going to do very well.
Justin, for you, you guys, the Browns took maybe the best athlete at corner last year, but he didn't really translate in year one. Um, what are your thoughts on this top two class right here?
I think Peters is the top corner, and I agree with Ian. One thing that I like a lot about Peters as opposed to Trey Waynes is that Peters really plays the quarterback better. He plays he has like really great peripheral vision. He seems to be able to keep track of the receiver out of his periphery while he reads the routes, while he reads the quarterback's eyes. And on the other hand, Trey Waynes doesn't do that. He really plays the receiver until the very last minute. And I think by doing so, he leaves himself open to pass interference calls, and he doesn't really get his head turned around enough and misses out on some chances to break up passes or get interceptions. Peters is better at turning and locating. He keeps track of it better the whole way through the route. And I'm going to throw a little curveball here because I don't even think Waynes is the second best corner in the class. I think the second best corner for me is a guy that some people are putting at safety. That's Eric Rowe from Utah. I really liked what I saw at Rowe. He is one of the tall, longer guys in this class. He had a really good combine as far as the athleticism drills, the jumps, and his 40 time. And at 6 feet tall, he's got over 32-inch arms. He's one of the only guys who's got that length and height-size combo. And then when he went out and ran a sub 4.5, I think he was at the 4.45 range with a 39-inch vertical. That's a really good athlete at corner, and his change of direction time is really good too. So I'm putting Eric Rowe. To me, he's a first rounder. Trey Waynes he's thin. He did pretty well at the combine as far as a straight line speed, and even did pretty well on the bench. But when it came down to that 3-cone drill, he was kind of stiff, and that shows up on tape. And that's why I don't really love him. I think he's more of a day 2 guy.
You talked about Kevin Johnson a little bit, Ian. Why would you have him as your number 2 cornerback in this class?
I think just looking at his skill set, he played at 173, which is kind of unheard of at the NFL level. I mean, that's the tiniest of tiny. He bulks at 15 pounds for the combine, still puts on a better combine performance than a guy like Waynes overall. Like Justin mentioned, the 40 time was great for Waynes, but outside of that, really underwhelming. Bench press really doesn't correlate to any success in the NFL, so that's not a big deal. But you look at Johnson's game, and with the added weight, for me, some of his concerns are going to be lesser concerns now. You worry about physicality. You worry about the ability in coverage to deal with a bigger box-out receiver that he's going to be seeing on the outside every single week. Even though big receivers aren't necessarily the only ones having success, we know that's not true. It's still important to have that size and the physical mindset. Otherwise, you're going to get moved off your spot when you're challenging at the ball, and then you're just going to get dominated all game. I mean, that's how guys like Brent Grimes, Cortland Finnegan, even Joe Hayden. I mean, Joe Hayden's not a huge guy, but he contests every ball when it comes in. And you want that same mindset from every cornerback. I mean, that's the number one thing I look for is how do they compete at the catch point? Do they locate the ball and compete for the ball? Kevin Johnson has that. His ball skills aren't tremendous. He's not super instinctive as far as, like, if you compare him to Marcus Peters, if you want to see an instinctive player, watch Marcus Peters. That dude knows where the ball is going before the quarterback even thinks about throwing the ball. It's uncanny. Johnson doesn't have that, but he still has the ability to locate the ball midair, and that helps him get away with sometimes some slight holds, some slight tugging downfield. I mean, and that's something that you see with Waynes. Waynes doesn't do consistently. He won't establish that he's actually playing the ball, which is the absolute number one thing once they're in coverage. Can you locate the ball? And that gives you a little bit more leeway. See that a lot with the Seahawks secondary. So Johnson, for me, he's not a high upside player, I don't think, but he's a solid potential starter. I like that Justin mentioned Eric Rowe as well. If I'm listing him at cornerback, which I'm not for everybody, it just depends on it really just depends on where he goes, because he's a talented safety as well. He really moved to his cornerback spot his senior year only because Utah needed him to play there so badly. And before that, he was playing safety, and he was a really good safety. He actually has center field potential, and that's why I think people are talking about him as like third, fourth rounder. I think that's, for me, it's crazy because a center field / press cornerback is usually a lock for a first round. So it's a really interesting cornerback class to just kind of break these guys down individually and then compare them to each other because they all bring such different skill sets. But probably the two most comparable, I'd say, are Johnson and Waynes, not only from a measurement standpoint, but also kind of where they fit into the NFL.
You kind of are hitting on the next topic, which is the 2014 class had some names at cornerback. The 2015 class seems to kind of lack those top-tier names. Is that simply because Marcus Peters, quote-unquote, off-the-field problems, Justice, or is this class just, does the cornerback class kind of follow the rest of the class where it's just not as talented?
Yeah, I would probably lean that, and I think there's multiple things. I mean, when a guy like Quentin Rollins, if you were able to develop over all these years, maybe he would be a better prospect than he is currently. You're looking at guys who declare early, like Jalen Collins, who haven't really totally developed all the way. Guys like Kevin Johnson, who like you guys said, I mean, he was playing in the 170s, like that was nuts. And then guys like Ifo Ekberolubu, who kind of like hurt his knee, Josh Shaw, who really didn't get to play this season. There's just a lot going on in this class that doesn't let like the upper echelon guys kind of like pop out. But you end up getting a bunch of guys who have that kind of potential towards the end of the first round, second round, early third round types. Yeah, I really just think it's like Waynes, Peters, maybe PJ Williams, and then there's a drop for me after that.
Justin, for you, how does this class kind of shake out at the top?
I think it's just kind of thin in the first couple of rounds. I like Peters and Rowe, probably Kevin Johnson. After that, I know people like Byron Jones. I haven't had a chance to watch too much of him. I know he had an explosive combine, but just in a very limited sample, he looks kind of mechanical to me. The way he gets down in his stance, the way he turns. So I'm wondering about his fluidity. After that, this is there's a lot of short-armed corners. There's a lot of small guys who I think can be pretty good players, but then you have to really determine what kind of capital are you going to spend on those guys. Rollins was a guy I think being mocked in first rounds, but then he goes and measures with 30-inch arms. He's really kind of compact for a cornerback. Another guy I liked in college is Duran Grant. He had kind of a so-so combine, and he's 200 pounds. He's got nice speed, but just really not a great athlete, more like a third or fourth round type of guy. I'm kind of intrigued by a couple guys that I think could make a conversion from other positions, and that's Nick Marshall, who, if you look at him on paper, he looks like one of the top cornerbacks, but then we know that he hasn't really played cornerback since he was a freshman in college. But he's got the length, he's got the size, and 4.5 speed. A really good athlete, and I think he can make a successful transition. It's just going to take some time. Another guy, I think he's pretty insistent on staying at receiver, but I think Tony Lippett from Michigan State really should strongly consider going and playing cornerback full time. He looked pretty good on limited tape as a senior. When you look at him athletically and his build and speed, everything about Tony Lippett is like twice as valuable if you put him at cornerback. If you leave him at receiver, he's just kind of an average athlete, and he's probably and he's at one of the deepest and most talented positions in the entire draft if he's at receiver. Then what is he, like a 5th or 6th round guy? If he's at cornerback and he can show up well in these workouts and run a better time at his pro day than he did at the combine, he was in the 4.6 range. That's not a death sentence. That's, Joe Hayden ran a 4.6 at the combine. So if Tony Lippett can just figure it out, go practice a cornerback, work out, I think he's got a chance to go maybe in the 4th round as a corner as opposed to like 5th or 6th round as a receiver. And we know, just look at the salaries right now. The corners are getting paid, especially the tall ones.
Yeah, and that was a point I was going to bring up. Is a lot of these guys that haven't, that are trying to convert or thinking about converting or have the ability to convert, you would think that days like today, where guys are just getting paid, that they would see that and be like, okay, that would make sense for me. I could do that maybe. I mean, Byron Maxwell got what, 663 or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not great.
Buster Screen got paid today.
Yeah. So
Sam Fields is making $10 million a year. Do not forget this.
Another former receiver, right?
Yep, from the University of Miami. He played corner for a little bit and then ended up converting again when he was an undrafted free agent.
Ian, as far as this class goes, how does the depth look on day 3? Are there guys like who came in last year off the top of my head? Pierre Desir. Who was the other late round guy last year that made an impact? I can't remember off the top of my head. I mean, is it as deep as last year, or what are your thoughts on these day 3 prospects?
Were you thinking about EJ Gaines?
Yeah,
Like
EJ Gaines.
EJ Gaines. That's a big one. There's intriguing options. I think there's a lot of schematic fits this year. There aren't really a lot of physical upside guys. It's a pretty weak draft as far as draft class, as far as guys that you want to bring in, just develop and have ridiculous athleticism, or like Justin mentioned, you almost want to take a guy like Lippett at cornerback more than receiver, because we're talking about day 3 guys. So I mean, Damian Swan of Georgia, or maybe Bobby McCain of Memphis. Even maybe Alex. I don't know. I've seen Alex Carter mocked in the 2nd or 3rd round, but to me, he's a day 3 guy. Kevin White at TCU is another guy. So you have these guys that are either slots or they're undersized boundary guys. They work for certain teams. They don't work for every team. And I think when you compare it to last year was just such a ridiculously loaded draft. I don't see the same thing this year so far. I am wrapping up my cornerback evaluations. I think I have like 2 more left, and I would almost rather swing for the fences on a guy like Nick Marshall, like Justin mentioned. That's a guy with physical upside, as opposed to looking at a guy like Ladarius Gunter out of Miami. There's a lot of just guys this year, in my opinion. A lot of guys that they ran slow. You see it on tape that they're slow. They're not necessarily overly quick. They're not necessarily overly big. So you start to look at the NFL and you're like, okay, well, where does that project? Well, it projects as like a special teams role or a 4th, 5th cornerback at best role. There's not really that value. So if you're not getting one of those day 1, day 2 cornerbacks this year, unless if you find a schematic fit, which those guys will probably be there. Bobby McCain or Senquez Golson are 2 guys that can fit into a scheme very well, but it's a very particular scheme. It has to be off ball. It has to be maybe even in the slot as an off slot corner. So, it's interesting to see. It's gonna be interesting to see which guys go. Which guys go where. But overall, I would definitely say it's a pretty weak class overall.
I like that you brought up Senquez Golson. I mean, that's a guy who's he's tiny though. He's like 5'8", 100 and not even 180 pounds, but he did have 10 interceptions this year. I mean, if I put him into my formula, he's not going to score well because he's so small. But realistically, you know, he ran a pretty good time. He's got pretty good vertical and what ball skills. The guy had a really fantastic senior year. And I look at a guy who was undrafted last year, but he had a really good rookie year for Cleveland. Was Kwan Williams. And in that kind of nickel role, in that kind of and filling in on special teams, making an impact, you can see how a guy, even an undrafted guy, can do that. But then on the flip side of that coin is Kwan Williams was undrafted. So can you roll the dice? Hope you find some guys like that. There are some small guys out here this year who have talent and who can stick, who can find a role, but you're not going to want to put Senquez Golson on your number 2 receiver like he was. You know, he was on the number 1, number 2 receiver last year at Ole Miss. That's not going to be feasible. Same thing with Kevin White. So those are 2 guys, you know, who really feisty. You know, ball skills are there, but they just lack the physical stature that you want. So you're not going to spend a high pick on those guys.
Justice, where does EFO fall into this equation overall with the injury?
Well, I mean, he might be able to recover by the time that even the preseason starts. But it's still like a non-contact ACL injury, and you probably don't want to push that if you're going to be investing in this dude. And then you just kind of throw into the fact that even though he was a 3-time All-American, he's still on the shorter side of everything. And I don't know. I like longer corners, and I'm fine with living with that bias. So if you play him somewhere like San Diego scheme, that would be a really good fit for him. But they obviously have their cornerbacks. But for most teams, especially if you're running cover 3 or something like that a bunch, I think he's a slot corner for you. Or in my opinion, one high free safety. I think he can play that one high free safety role in cover 3 that people are freaking out about. There's 5 dudes who can do it in the entire league consistently, and I think he has the potential to be able to do that. It's not crazy to me to say his absolute top potential could be Earl Thomas, which is not what you could say about every safety in this class.
Anything else on the corners, guys?
I think it's a good slot corner draft. I want to fit a couple names in there. Lorenzo Doss out of Tulane. I think he could be a fantastic slot receiver or slot cornerback. You talk about Kwan Williams for the Browns. I think Doss could come in late rounder, maybe UDFA. Really good ball skills, really tough kid. Compact, but he's super strong at his size. I really like him a lot as a day 3 slot corner. And then probably my favorite sleeper, I know Dane Brugler was just tweeting about him, but Craig Mager out of Texas State. Really good measurements, good film, good speed. I mean, this guy has all the tools that you kind of want to develop. I mean, if you're talking about developmental corners, day 3, he'd be one of my favorite options. They're few and far between. But if you can land one of those 2 guys, day 3, those might be your 2 impact day 3 guys in 2015.
I'm going to throw a couple other names out here that are along those same lines. Another guy I know Dane likes a lot is DeJon Smith from Florida Atlantic. He's another kind of undersized guy, but really had a good senior season, and he can contribute on kick return team right away. He was a good kick returner for the Owls. So I think DeJon Smith. There's another guy who I haven't heard anybody talking about. He did not get a combine invite. The combine invitations seem to pass over the entire state of Louisiana at times, but Louisiana Tech has a guy, Lavander Liggins, and he was a player who came on really strong toward the end of the year. I got a chance to watch some La Tech games, and Liggins was a player making a lot of plays on the ball, breaking up passes. So another slot corner type. I'm not sure how fast he is. Their pro day is coming up, but Liggins is a guy I'm keeping an eye on because I think he's another one of these deep sleeper players that could go on late day 3, and people will be like, who is this guy? Well, now you know.
Justice, we'll start with you on the safety class because I know you want to move EFO back there so bad. What are your thoughts overall on the safety class, and is it kind of Landon Collins and then everybody else, or is there some talent that we're overlooking?
Yeah, this safety class isn't very good. Like, I could see two guys being, well, depending on what you count as equal, right? So, like, we got to kind of, like, throw that out there. I could see 2 to 3 guys being drafted in the top 100 at safety. Because, like, Landon Collins and then, like, Cody Pruitt, there's guys with outside shots. Like, I know Tart out of Sanford is getting a lot of hype. I haven't not watched enough Sanford to, like, even tell you. I've seen some highlights, and I know I've talked to agents and stuff, and they were telling me, like, in season, like, this guy could be a second rounder type thing. Then we have Gerard Holloman, and Reed by midseason. I was never a huge Gerard Holloman guy. And then there's guys like Chris Hackett. Like, Chris Hackett might end up being my number 2 safety in this class if you don't count EFO. He's just kind of good all around, early declaration. And then there's kind of like unknowns, guys that like I haven't seen yet, like James Sample. Like, I've seen some serious stuff, and I know he trains at University of Washington and things like that, but I haven't really been able to dig deep on him. But as far as like true safeties, it's probably like Landon Collins, Chris Hackett, Cody Pruitt, and those are probably going to be the only guys that I'm going to give top 100 grades to.
Ian, for you in this class, how do you look at this the safety class and overall, and what do you think about the prospects?
It's surprisingly weak. With such a premium on safeties, it's still interesting to me how few impact safeties that we have, not only in college but in the NFL. Outside of the top 5 to 8 guys, as far as like free safeties, and maybe even top 5, outside the top 5, you're really not seeing great safety play consistently. And the NFL is starving for it. I mean, we just saw it with Devin McCourty. The contracts these guys are getting are highly impressive. So it's interesting to me that the college game isn't really producing anybody. I had the chance to watch Jaquiski Tartt all season for Optimum, and that film, I wish I had recorded the games because I didn't realize that they wouldn't keep them up at a couple different sites throughout the season. But the way I look at him is he's kind of like Bernard Pollard. That's the exact player comparison I'd give him to. He's a cover 2 corner, better fit as a strong safety. He's not instinctive with the ball. He really struggles in coverage when you ask more than anything but a cover 2 shell from him. If you put him in man-to-man situations, he really struggled in Mobile. And Samford's defense was so talented that he didn't have to do much. Like, he just kind of chilled in the back of the defense as a single high safety. But even though he was playing single high, he didn't show anything that you want to see from a single high safety. Ability to read a quarterback, to manipulate the quarterback, break quickly on the ball. He just, physically, he's got the talent, but mentally he's not there yet. So he's a guy that if you want him to become an impact safety, it just might take time from a coverage standpoint. If you put him in a strong safety role, he could star. He could actually absolutely be a star. I heard one scout talk about he could be the next Troy Polamalu, which that's super high praise, but the skill set is there. I mean, physically, this guy has everything that you want. So I agree with Justice. That could be a day 2 guy. I think I gave him a late day 2 grade, just for the physical upside. My top guy is Eric Rowe, depending on what scheme he's going to. I prefer to keep guys at cornerback. If you can keep him at cornerback, do that. But it just depends on where he goes. So if he goes to a cover 3, not a press scheme, but more like a cover 3, more similar to, I don't know, more of like what Miami plays. He would be a great free safety there. He'd probably be my top safety prospect this year. I'm not a huge Landon Collins fan. He's really good against the run, but you have to worry about his frame and his durability being an issue because we saw it with his shoulder in the last few games of the season. He just wasn't the same player as he was early in the year, which, pinch me if you've ever heard an Alabama player kind of breaking down as the season goes on. You worry about the same thing with Collins with his frame. It's just not a well-built frame. In coverage, he really struggles as well. He's not the ha-ha Clinton Dix types of instinctive player. He's more like a strong safety. And those type of box safeties just only have so much value, I feel like. And maybe that's just my own valuation of them, but I don't feel like you need to spend a top 10 pick on a guy like that. There's some intriguing guys, though, later in the draft. A guy like Demarius Randall from Arizona State. Very toolsy player, had an impressive Senior Bowl, good speed. Good instinct. He's not necessarily a day one impact type, but I think you bring him in on day two to develop, and you might get a pretty solid safety, which you really hope for now. If you get a star, you hit gold. And if you get a solid safety, you're seeing teams reward that most years outside of, recording as more of a star. So I can't use him as an example, but as we get through free agency, I think we'll see guys like Ron Parker from the Chiefs. He's about to get a nice contract. And then one of my favorites is Ibrahim Campbell from Northwestern. And Justice mentioned the other one, Justice. You mentioned Sample, the kid from Louisville. I just watched him today, actually. He's a really solid safety. I think both of those safeties are solid, strong safety types, can play in coverage, have experience in man, as well as just dropping back into cover two shells and playing pretty effectively downhill. It's basically a class where there's not a huge amount of pure ups. If you want an upside pick, maybe Justin Cox out of Mississippi State or Fritz Etienne out of Memphis, who's a one-year college player. Very good physical specimen, but on the football field, he just has no clue what's going on, and he plays. Probably my favorite sleeper is Cassius Sendish from Kansas. So is there value in this class? Yes, but there's a lot of day two, day three types that you're just kind of taking a swing on. A guy like Campbell, a guy like Sample, limited upsides, but they can still be solid players, I guess. It's a very interesting class that, like you guys mentioned, it's weak overall, and I think that's just reflected in the safety class where you're trying to fit pieces in and just say, okay, this guy might become a player here in 2 years.
Justin, end our safety talk with this for me. Is the transition or the move to needing safeties that can cover better going to change how we grade these safeties and make them less valuable than perhaps they have been in the past? Because I feel like Landon Collins 5 years ago even probably is a top 15 guy, where other people have him, much lower.
Yeah, I think it is. I think we're already seeing that. I mean, Ian mentioned Demarius Randall, and I'm a fan of Randall. When you look at his athleticism and his playmaking ability, I could see him going late on day two. But now you're even hearing talk about him possibly being a second-round pick. That's pretty lofty for him, but I think teams look at those. He's back there making some deep interceptions, breaking up some passes, returning some pick for a touchdown, I think, against Notre Dame. So he's making those big plays. Those are flashy, and he's not a big guy. I think, size-wise, he reminds me of Jimmy Ward, and I think maybe teams are kind of envisioning that role too, a safety who can cover, who can also move in and maybe play some nickel corner. So that makes a player like Randall a little bit more valuable than a player like Landon Collins, who you're probably not going to. I'm not saying that Demarius Randall is a better player than Landon Collins, but Landon Collins is kind of that box safety that we're talking about. He's like another linebacker on the field. I think he covers a little bit better than maybe he showed this year, but he came in at the combine weighing almost 230 pounds. I don't know why he's playing at such a heavy weight, and that might be slowing him down. But a player like Randall has that range and has that the ball skills, the playmaking ability to break up passes on those slants and little in cuts, and even deep down the field. He's going to make his share of mistakes. He's going to get burned too, but when he makes a play, he's got some flash to him. So I think, it's hard for us. We've talked about this on the show many times. Like, it's hard for us to see what's going on deep down the field, in the deep quarters of the field, for some of these safeties. And that makes safety a tough position to grade for everybody. I think now we're starting to see some more all-22 film on Draft Breakdown, which is good. But it's still kind of limited right now to which teams that we're seeing. So I wanted to mention before we move on, though, another guy that we didn't talk about was he didn't have that great of a senior year, but he came into the year with some buzz, and that was Curtis Drummond from Michigan State. And I think because he had a bit of a rough year, gave up some big plays, that maybe he's being overlooked a little bit right now. I don't think he was quite as bad as he looked at times this year. Didn't have a good 40 at the combine, so he's going to look to improve on that at the pro day. But he's a player I think can give you some more of that coverage, to be more of a coverage safety, and he defends the run pretty well too. Another guy I'm looking at along those lines is UCLA's Anthony Jefferson. He played some corner this year. He ran like a 4.7 at the combine, but today at the pro day he cut about a tenth of a second off that. So he's another player, has that experience playing corner, so he might offer some of those coverage skills that we're talking about. And maybe those two guys, Drummond and Jefferson, might go a little bit earlier than we think.
Anything else on safeties as we get out of here, guys?
Derek Dargan could probably be a good special teams guy. He was Oregon's defensive MVP. I mean, just I don't even think he made it to the combine. Like he's just kind of a dude who's just like all effort type stuff. If he makes a roster, he's gonna be active because he's gonna be all over on special teams. It's just a question if he's gonna do that or not. And he's not really an upside guy. Like that's just kind of what you're gonna get out of him.
Arizona's kid is like that too. I can't think of his last name, but starts with a B.
Bondurant?
Yeah, exactly. Same type of player. Like, don't be surprised at all if Dargan and Bondurant are just flying around the field next year as a UDFA or a late round pick and just making killer hits. I love those guys, man. You always have to have guys like that on your team somewhere.
Before we head out of here, whether it's a draft take or just in free agency from the last 3 days, give me one hot take that you guys have seen this last couple days, and we'll start with you, Justin.
Well, one of my favorites, one of my favorite times of year is the combine and the takeaways that we get from the combine, and I can't point to a specific person in this case because it's a group of people. So I'm going to point to the fantasy football folks and just talk about some of the takes that I've seen about Chris Conley, the receiver out of Georgia. Yeah, he had a fantastic combine. We know that. He was more like the vertical and the speed was really surprising. Not great change of direction, but it's leading to some very interesting comps in the fantasy world, and I know they're comparing not the player trait, but more the production. But I saw one fantasy guy describe it as an OBJ, meaning of course Odell Beckham Jr. type leap of faith in terms of production. I think you want to multiply that by 2 because Conley, I like Conley a lot, but I just think it's dangerous to put those 2 names in the same sentence. There was just so much more that I saw out of Odell Beckham as a college prospect. I love these combines. I love the numbers, but we can't get carried away. I guess with the fantasy guys, it's a little bit different, though, because they're just strictly looking at the upside and the numbers and trying to find those next deep sleepers. But when I saw OBJ and Chris Conley in the same sentence, I kind of felt bad for both guys.
Yeah, the move to what's the word I'm looking for here? I think it's kind of metrics. There we go. The metrics guys has definitely changed the way we judge players, and so it's interesting to see when a guy that is big and is super athletic, now all of a sudden there's more interest in him, even if he wasn't really productive in college. It's an interesting dynamic and change in the draft process, but I do think it will end up unearthing guys in the same way that a lot of people missed on day 3 wide receiver prospects and stuff like that, or not missed, but didn't notice day 3 guys before because they have terrible stats, and a lot of the early draft Twitter, not even draft Twitter, but internet draft stuff was based on stats as opposed to film. So, Ian, for you, have you seen any?
Just thinking of free agency, I feel like the Ndamukong Suh kind of saga, I guess we'll say, is interesting to see kind of how people fall on that edge of the sword. I feel like when a certain franchise, and Miami, we know Miami has swung and missed big time recently on a lot of these free agents, and they deserve a lot of heat for their evaluation of talent and trying to plug in, squares into circles, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't work like that if you don't properly evaluate talent and use the talent when it gets there. I feel like for some other franchises, I feel like if it wasn't Miami signing Sue, or if it, let's say, and you can group a couple different franchises in there with that. Let's say Cleveland had gotten Sue. Let's say, maybe even Oakland had gotten Sue. It's usually sold as a disastrous signing. When I think, yeah, the money's ridiculous. The money's crazy. But if a guy like Gerald McCoy hit the market, or if Marcel Darius hits the market next year, those guys would get similar money. And we're seeing it with Revis. Revis just got crazy money a few hours ago. But that's what it is. They're on the open market, and revenue's at an all-time high. So you pay those players. So I think there was a lot of negativity, and I feel like it was because of the franchise's lack of success. But if a team like if Detroit, I shouldn't even say Detroit. Let's say Green Bay would have signed him. It'd be highly lauded. Oh, Ted Thompson finally got off his ass and answered the phone, and Justice would be so excited. But I just think it's interesting to kind of see kind of where the sides fall on that. And like I said, Miami's very, very deserving of a lot of criticism for how they handle things. But at the very least, I like that they swung for the home run, and I think that should at least be acknowledged that they swung for the home run. And if they strike out doing it, well, I mean, it was a calculated risk. That's a guy that hasn't missed any time over the past few years. He's a little bit of a hothead, but in terms of on-field production, the guy's been a monster. So it's not like when they signed, Mike Wallace, for example, or Hainsworth is a guy I always see people talking about Sue, and it's like those aren't at all comparable people. And he went to the same scheme as he was coming from, so it shouldn't be an issue of where he fits in the Dolphins' defense.
Anything as we head out of here?
Yeah, shouts to the dude who said if Cobb leaves Green Bay, Ted Thompson has to leave too. Shouts to those dudes. I love Packer fans, man. We're the most spoiled. We are literally about to, if we somehow come out with a cornerback, we're literally going to be heading into the draft without a need other than off-the-ball linebacker. Like a single off-the-ball linebacker. And Packer fans are still complaining about, if we don't bring back Balaga, if we don't bring back Cobb.
And yeah, so that's what Packers fans get. They're spoiled. They have been spoiled for a long time. You go from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers. Well, our 3 franchises suffer through garbage for the last.
Man, we went through like a 5-week stretch of like Seneca Wallace and Scott Tolzien and Matt Flynn.
Yeah, and
they bring that up like we're the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, our 3 franchises have gone through that for 15 years.
I think the Browns would try and sign any one of those 3 guys tomorrow if they had the opportunity, if they hit the open market. And I wanted to, along those lines of the Green Bay Ted Thompson guys, I saw a great Browns tweet. Trent Cole, before he signed with the Colts, he was in town, I guess, for a couple of days visiting with the Browns, and I saw a Browns fan tweet that if he was there for 2 days and allowed to leave without a contract, that it was time to blow up the front office again. This is the 32-year-old Trent Cole we're talking about, who was cut before free agency, I think. So there you go. I mean, that's where we are with some of these franchises. Like Ian said, they're damned if they do, damned if they don't.
Well, I appreciate you guys joining me again tonight. Ian, thanks for your expertise, especially on the defensive backs. Ian's one of the best guys on Twitter and on the internet, working for Bleacher Report, covering defensive back prospects in the draft. So I appreciate your time, and make sure you subscribe on iTunes, and we'll be back next week as we get into kind of team previews for each team. So thanks for joining us tonight, Ian, and Justin, Justice, have a great night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, guys.